Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, the UK's largest professional union for prison, correctional and secure psychiatric workers with over 33,000 members. In this special episode, we look back to last month's special event organised by the POA at the Houses of Parliament to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the removal of prison officers' right to strike and to urge support for the union's ongoing campaign for this right to be restored throughout the UK, as it already has been in Scotland. General Secretary Steve Gillan introduces speakers at the event, including National Chair Mark Fairhurst, TUC General Secretary Paul Nowak, Mick Whelan from Aslef, Mick Lynch from the RMT, Martin Kavanagh of PCS, and Joe Grady of the University and Colleges Union. Parliamentarians who supported and spoke at the event were members of the Justice team such as Lord John Atlee and former POA branch chair, now MP Sally Jameson. The Parliamentary Justice Union's chair Liz Saville Roberts MP, Jeremy Corbyn MP and Justice Select Committee chair Andy Slaughter MP also spoke, together with Clare Mellor from leading trade union law firm Thompsons.
A bit of hush now because we're going to get started on this important reception. You're not going to hear very much from me. I'm going to introduce all our speakers, and then at some juncture, Mark Fairhurst, our national chairman, is going to speak. I've sort of told all the speakers not to speak for too long because we've got lots of excellent speakers, but I've told Mark, because he's the POA chair, he can speak for as long as he wants. So before we do start, I want to give a tribute to our Deputy General Secretary, Joe Simpson, who is sadly no longer with us. I think everybody knows what a brilliant trade unionist and stalwart, not just for the POA, but for the whole trade union movement. Please raise your glasses to Joe Simpson. Cheers, Joe. My first speaker this evening on the 30th anniversary of us not having the right to strike, a pernicious piece of legislation that clearly has no place in society, let alone on the statute books. So Paul Nowak, the TUC General Secretary, who's been a magnificent supporter of the POA, not just as General Secretary, but before he was General Secretary. Paul, you're very welcome.
Well, thanks, Steve. And I'm very proud to be here tonight to speak briefly, to bring solidarity and support on behalf of the TUC. Today's an historic day. The government's Employment Rights Bill is having its second reading. This will be the biggest upgrade of workers and trade union rights in a generation. New rights for millions of workers. The first time a government has rolled back anti-union legislation in decades. The Trade Union Act 2016 will go, and the Strikes Act, which we campaigned so hard against last year, the Minimum Services Levels Act, effectively an attack on the right to strike, will be repealed before it has ever been used. An historic day indeed, but it's one, I think, which highlights the absolute injustice of denying prison officers their right to strike. And my message to MPs, to ministers and peers is simple. The right to strike is a fundamental human right, and it should apply to all workers, including prison officers. No ifs, no buts, no exceptions. This is an important piece of unfinished business. So we need to see, alongside new rights for millions of workers, alongside the repeal of the 1996 Act and the MSL's legislation, the repeal of that anti-union legislation from the Tories 40 years ago. Tomorrow, with the assistance of Steve, I'll be writing directly to the Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood to urge the government to get round the negotiating table, to talk to the POA, to put right a fundamental wrong. One further just quick reflection from me. We all know the state that the last government left our public services in. And if you look at the headlines, it's all about schools, it's all about hospitals, it's all about local councils. And that is absolutely right. But we also shouldn't forget that the last government destroyed and devastated the criminal justice system and those working in our prisons. After years of austerity, our criminal justice system is in crisis. Your members see it all the time. Prisons at bursting point, more stress, more work and more assaults, and POA members left to pick up the pieces. And it's a reminder that prison officers remain our first and last line of defence against some of society's most dangerous people, play an important role in rehabilitation and keep prisoners safe and keep the public safe. So it's about time they got the respect they deserve, fair rewards, proper recognition, equal rights, and a voice in the prison system. So I know, Steve, we're going to hear from Mark. You and the other officers are incredible advocates on behalf of your members. I know the members are behind you. I want you to know the whole of the trade union movement is behind you. And I think the Labour government could do worse than making a start in terms of restoring basic rights to prison officers, repeal Section 127 of that Criminal Justice Act. Let's mark a new start for the prison service, a new start that puts prison officers right at its heart. Thanks, Steve, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that magnificent support, as always. I'm now going to call Liz Saville Roberts MP for Plaid Cymru. Liz has been a big supporter of the POA in many campaigns. So, Liz, many thanks.
Thanks very much, Steve. And it's an honour to follow you, Paul, as well. And it's an honour to speak in front of so many good trade unionists who I know do some excellent work in our prisons. It's been a privilege to be working alongside you in your many campaigns. Of course, the campaign today is to talk about the right to strike. That, of course, something that's absolutely critical. I'm very much aware that you're treated, on the one hand, as one of the emergency services, but when it comes to pensions, you're not. On the one hand, with the right to strike, but with pensions, you're not. Now, I'm here, of course, you may well be asking, why is there a Plaid Cymru MP standing here in front of you? I'm here because I've been honoured to be the co-chair of the Justice Union Parliamentary Group since I started in 2015, and continue, of course, to work alongside the POA in bringing your voice here and making sure that parliamentarians, the other parliamentarians speaking as well, actually hear what you have to say directly. It's very, very valuable that we can hear from you and that we know exactly what you want us to tell to tell other parliamentarians. We hope, and I don't know if he's here, can't see from here, but whether the new Minister Thompson, will be coming in, will be dropping by. We know that he understands the need to get the right staff in our prisons and that we need to get them to stay after they've been trained, after they've learned their craft. We need to get the right staff, we need to get them to stay. And he will, I hope, we'll be working with him with his review of prison officer training, which is an issue, of course, that the POA has raised time and time again. And we need to keep, of course, to be able to keep our brightest and our best prison officers, we need to be able to pay them, treat them properly, which is, of course, why in the Justice Unions group, we support your campaign for a return to collective bargaining with full industrial rights, the right to strike. And, of course, that 68 is too late to wait for a pension. It should be 60 years after 30 years service, as, of course, with the police. Officers need the right personal protective equipment, especially in the volatile youth estate, which is, of course, why I support the POA's call for expanding the rollout of Parva pepper spray. And it is depressing that it's taken the current capacity crisis for the government and the media and the public to take our prisons seriously. But we should be using this opportunity to call for a different kind of criminal justice system, a positive staff and prisoner relationship, and reducing reoffending at its heart. That means a different kind of prison service, different kinds of prisons, and a different kind of relationship with the probation service too. And as Steve wrote recently, and I can say this, disappointing that the new Labour government is continuing the Tories programme of building the next generation of mega prisons. We know that smaller units run by the public sector for the public good are way more effective in supporting rehabilitation. And we will, of course, be continuing to make that case to the Justice Unions groups. So to close, you can't run prisons fit for the 21st century on the cheap. And the Justice Union Parliamentary Group won't stop reminding the government of that, whichever party is in power. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much, Wiz, and much appreciated once again. It gives me great delight in calling our next speaker, Mick Whelan, General Secretary of Aslef and Chair of TULO. Mick's been a great trade unionist fighter, as you will know from the magnificent victories they've had with Aslef, defeating the MSLs. So Mick, Very welcome.
I think that trade unionism at its simplest is we only really go on strike for three reasons: injustice against our members, health and safety, or trying to better conditions, or occasionally, as we've seen more recently, when people try to smash us apart and they can't destroy our unity or solidarity. People pigeonhole us by what we do. People pigeonhole us in the sectors in which we work in, but we are so much more than. We are a movement. And therefore, there is no place for anybody outside the LLO. There's no place for anybody outside of the Employment Rights Bill tonight that shouldn't have the right to strike, that shouldn't have the right to protect itself, that shouldn't have the right to stand with each other, and shouldn't have a voice everywhere. So I fully support the POA and what they seek to do. And I do remember a couple of years back, Steve Gillan standing up in the TUC and saying, who's going to turn the key on me? Well, no one's going to turn the key in the POA while we fight as a movement. We undo this injustice and give everybody the right to strike that they should have. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mick. And now I'm going to call another great supporter in the trade union movement, Joe Grady.
Perhaps a bit of a surprise to people, but there's actually an incredibly close relationship between UCU and the POA. We represent people who educate in prisons, and the POA has been a tremendous supporter of every single campaign that UCU has run in recent years. And I think it's worth drawing a few parallels. During the pandemic, our members who delivered education in prison balloted and nearly, but didn't have to take industrial action in order to keep our members safe. A right denied to the POA. Our members recently have taken industrial action in prison in order to get better wages. And they have. Some of our members won over a 10% pay increase. A right denied to the POA. Over the last 2 years, significant amounts of unions, just as we have heard from Mick, have taken action, even defence of themselves, to better conditions, or to protect our movement. A right denied to the POA for 30 years now. And regardless of that, there has been no stronger champion of our union and every other union fighting to do the things that they have been denied to do than the POA. And what we've seen during that time, all right, coupled with austerity as well, is a degradation of pay, conditions, people leaving the sector, and increased violence in prisons. And those things go hand in hand. Because when you have a strong unionised workforce who is able to take action if necessary to protect themselves, you have a safer working environment. So wherever you stand, whatever sector, it is in everybody's interest, whether you educate in prisons, you're a prison officer, or happen to be in one yourself, to support a properly legislated and regulated POA, and you will always have our support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to have the backing of so many in the trade union movement. The next speaker, though, is a man who's been supporting the POA for well over 30 years on every issue that I can remember in Parliament. He's been a good friend to the POA. He's been a good friend to me personally. And as a Labour Party member, I think it's disgraceful the way he's been treated within that party. But Jeremy, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the POA for incredible friendship support you've always shown to me in the good days and the more difficult days. All days are interesting. I want to also thank the POA for the work it does in representing the members in prisons and the way you speak out about the appalling conditions that are in many of our prisons and the way that leads to violence, leads to overcrowding, leads to criminalisation of prisoners and turns them into not the places they ought to be, which is one of reform and rehabilitation and reintegration into society, into something much worse. And I think that the work of the POA in challenging the underfunding of the prison system is very, very important. And I thank you for all the work you've done on that. Fundamentally, the right to strike is something that's there in the ILO Convention, first signed in 1921. And it is also there in the international human rights legislation. It's absolutely clear right to withdraw your labour collectively if you're in dispute with your employer. And that's exactly what the POA demands. So it's simply not fair and not right that prison officers are denied the right to strike. And actually, a more powerful union with that right to strike means that it can negotiate from a stronger position with the employer. It also means that actually the places are better run and better managed. If you look across British industry, look across all industries where there's a strong union, you find better management, higher rates of productivity, and a much more satisfied workforce. I have one prison in my borough left, that's Pentonville. We used to have HMP Holloway as well. And I've often talked to many of the prison officers, particularly in Holloway when it was open. So I went there quite often to talk to them. And I thought, what fantastic people, very dedicated to their jobs, very, very supportive of the prisoners. But they would say things to me like, Jeremy, what are we supposed to do? We want our prisoners to get education. But every time there's a staff shortage, every time something else comes up, the first thing that gets cut is education. We're here because we want to see prisoners change and improve their lives, but we're not given the resources to achieve that. We're not given the opportunity to achieve that, and that's what we want to do. So I want to say a big thank you to the Prison Officers Association for the work you've done, the support you give to everybody else, and I'm absolutely with you on getting the right to strike, just like every other worker in every other industry should have and must have, and we'll support you to make sure we win that.
Thank you very, very much for that, Jeremy. And we also have lots of MPs who are at the second reading of the employment bill popping in and out. So you will see them as they come in. I'm very pleased to say that Minister James Timson is actually in the room. And I thank you, James, for attending. It's much appreciated. And we will continue constructive dialogue with Minister Timson going forward, because there's much we agree on. And I hope he gives as much support to us as we undoubtedly will to him to get the crisis eradicated from our justice system. So thank you, James. You are very welcome. Another stalwart of the trade union movement and big supporter over the years for the POA is none other than Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT. Mick, as you well know, is a fighter. He believes in social justice. In fact, that socialist word becomes a dirty word, but Mick is our friend, always will be. Well done, Mick.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome to speak.
Thanks very much. I wanted to spill a couple of myths before we start. I'm not Steve Gillan's brother. Well, I am Mark. But I just want to say the RMT and the POA have always had a very strong bond together. I think it's because the government had in mind that they would be looking after us after a few injunctions and refusals to pay and illegal strikes or whatever, but that's never come to pass. But I do have a personal affinity because all my kids were born in Hammersmith Hospital maternity unit, and they took great trouble to put that maternity unit looking directly into one of the wings at Wormwood Scrubs. So that was a great lesson for me, that if you bring your kids up wrong, you could end up playing football on Wormwood Scrubs. But it's also a fact that in the West London in the Ealing Trades Council, we had prison officers from Wormwood Scrubs, and they used to educate us, the rest of us trade unionists. Some of us might be a bit liberal, some of us might be a bit lefty, but they educated us to the reality of what the criminal justice system is and how underfunding and how the degradation of the estate, the degradation of the facilities, and the degradation of the staff and the prisoners, the inmates, leads to more problems for working class people in working class areas. So justice is a class issue as far as I'm concerned. It suits the ruling class to bang more and more working class people up, many of whom have got profound mental health problems, many of them have got profound drug problems, and they expect our prison officers, who, as we've heard, are dedicated to their job, to just deal with all those societal problems without the proper support, without the proper facilities, and without the political care that needs to go into this system, is a disgrace. Now, I'm glad there's Labour Party activists and MPs and lords and whatever in the room, because I'm certain that Labour will do the right thing. If we were against these measures in opposition when they took our human rights away, took our civil rights away, took our right to strike off us, then we should be against it when we achieve power. And now it's up to the Labour Party to do the right thing, to make sure that our prison officers have the ability to collectively bargain freely, to negotiate freely, and to withdraw their labour as a last resort if they need to do that in their own interests, but also in the interests of the service. Because what we've seen over the last 3 years is that the people that are defending our public services are often the trade union members that have been forced to take strike action. We've got members in the Royal Fleet Auxiliary this week that are on strike, having to take strike action under a Labour government when they're needed to do humanitarian and defence duties. Public sector workers have been ignored for far too long. That has to change under Labour, and we call on all Labour Party members, all Labour Party MPs, all Labour Party ministers to do the right thing by the POA, restore their rights and look after working people at their workplace. So good luck to the POA. I know you're going to see it through. We've seen the public ownership of the railways. We've got the Employment Rights Act. Let's get the third one of those three in a hat-trick and give the POA their rights. Good luck to all of you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in inviting our national chairman, Mark Fairhurst, to speak about our 30th anniversary and this pernicious piece of legislation that he confined to the dustbin, quite frankly. Mark has been a forthright chairman. He's been excellent. He does brilliant media work, and I'm sure, Mark, we're going to be very busy tomorrow doing lots of media as well with the sentencing bill and other stuff coming forward. So, Mark, you're very welcome.
Well, thanks, Steve. It will only be a few minutes, I promise. And it's great to see so many people turn up, and you're all very welcome. And thank you to the amazing speakers we've had so far. I just want to take you back 30 years, actually. There'll be a few people in this room who remember this. 1994, that's when we lost our trade union rights. Now, remember the year. Let's see if you can remember this from 1994. Schindler's List won 7 Oscars. Remember Schindler's List? The Channel Tunnel opened. It was also the year Nelson Mandela was elected as president of South Africa. Michael Schumacher won his first F1. Labour Party leader John Smith sadly passed away and was succeeded by Tony Blair. Brazil won the World Cup. The Ford Escort was the best-selling car. Remember the XR3i? I always wanted one of them. Best-selling song of the year. Remember this? Wet, Wet, Wet. Love is All Around. Remember that one? What was the Christmas number one? You'll all moan in a minute. Stay Another Day, East 17 with Mariah Carey. Remember that? But the most significant event of that year, it was the year that the POA lost their trade union rights, their human rights, and their workplace rights. Now, I remember Jack Straw in opposition getting up at POA conference and saying, when Labour Party come to power, we will restore your trade union rights and we will repeal Section 127 of the 1994 Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. And as soon as he came into power, I'm going to quote him now, he never did that. He said, industrial action can have no more place within the prison service than it can within a police service. For this reason, whilst in opposition, I made no commitment whatever to changing the relevant provisions of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994, nor will we do so whilst in government. We've still got no compensatory measures in place because we haven't got the right to take industrial action, despite the promises from successive governments. We had a pay review body formed in 2011 with no binding disputes procedure. The pay review body can recommend what they like to governments, and governments can totally ignore it. They don't have to implement any recommendations from a pay review body. That is the only compensatory measure we have. When we're in dispute, we talk to the employer, but we can't go to ACAS, we can't have binding arbitration. We've got no legally binding rights whatsoever. In 2011, we launched an appeal with the European Court of Human Rights because of the lack of freedom of association and because it breached our human rights, not having the right to take any form of industrial action. And it's only now in 2024, after such a prolonged period after getting dismissed by court after court, that court has now said, we accept your appeal. And it invited this Labour government to sit down and negotiate a friendly agreement. In other words, sort it out before you go to court. They wrote to this government in July, after the result of the general election. We're heading towards Christmas. We've agreed one extension so the government can respond, and still we await an invitation to sit down with this Labour government and sort this issue out. So to the Labour MPs in the room, can you take it back to Secure and get it sorted? Where's our invite? Because I'll tell you something now, if a prisoner waited that long for a complaint to be responded to, we'd be in disciplined trouble. So why is it good enough for the Labour politicians? It's not. Get it sorted. In opposition, I never met a Labour MP who didn't agree that we should have our trade union rights restored. Now they're in power, it's time for them to deliver for us. No excuses. You can't even make an excuse that's going to cost the taxpayer, because it's not going to cost the taxpayer a penny. Restoring our trade union rights is free of charge. You can't say that very much in London. We've been under a permanent High Court injunction since 2017, which stops me even saying to my members, refuse to work overtime, work to rule, stop volunteering for tasks that you don't get paid for. I can't even say that to them. And when it comes to pay, like many trade union leaders in this room, when you get a derisory pay offer, you ballot your members and you go on strike and you fight and you win and you get decent pay awards. I can't even do that. We last walked out in 2018. In 2018, violence against staff was running at 30 a day. I was fed up with my members getting used as punch bags with no protections in place, and we walked them out. And me and self and Steve, we got threatened with imprisonment, which, as I've said before, that's great. Bring it on. But who's going to bang me up? All my members are outside on strike. So do your worst. We got fined over £210,000 for backing two branches who dared to walk to the gate to protect the health and safety of their members. How dare you? The best thing we've brokered over the last few years is a legally binding health and safety protocol, which you're not afraid to use every time we've used it. Despite the threats coming at me and Steve, every time we've used it, we've won. We've reached a compromise, we've protected the health and safety of our members, and we've supported our branches. But the time has come now to restore our trade union rights, like they did in Scotland in 2015, like our operational support grades have the right to strike, and like our colleagues in secure mental health institutions have the right to strike. Now it's our turn, because we can't go on like this. And think about it. It doesn't stop us doing the right thing by our members, so you might as well give us our trade union rights back and subject us to the thresholds that we have to meet, because it doesn't stop us taking action. So thanks to you for turning up, thanks to our great guest speakers, and please, to the Labour politicians in this room, support the right of prison officers, give us our human rights back, our workplace right back, and our trade union rights back, because that's the least we deserve. Thank you very much.
And you see, before I call the next speaker, there was a common theme throughout that Mark just said there. In many respects, if you look at the actions that we've taken over the years, it's not actually been about pay. It's not been about us wanting more money. It's actually about safety. And when the injunction came in 1994 through Michael Howard, who was the then Home Secretary, it was because Preston had locked out because of overcrowding. That was the reality. And ever since then, that has been the reality. The force used against our members, getting battered day in, day out, and us daring to step up and say, no more. So Mark's absolutely right. And we will continue, even if it takes another 30 years, to continue with our campaign. So thank you very much on that. I'm going to be balanced now. I'm going to invite another female up to speak, which is going to be Clare Mellor, the CEO of Thompsons. Clare.
Hello. I'm not just speaking because I'm a woman. I'm also speaking because, like everyone else in this room, like everyone else in this room, we support the POA. So thank you to Steve, to Mark, thank you to the POA for the chance to speak this evening. And it's a privilege to work with everyone at the POA in what is an extraordinary range of litigation for a union of its size. Much of our work consists of employment tribunal claims, unfair dismissal, constructive dismissal, but much of it, too much of it, is dealing with the consequences of POA members working in one of the least safe workplaces in Western Europe, dealing with the underfunding and overcrowding in prisons, which is such a blot on our society. We deal with huge numbers of cases for members who have been injured in the epidemic of violent assaults, too frequently facing life-changing, career-ending assaults. As you know, the POA is seeking a Royal Commission on prisons and the wider criminal justice system, as was promised but never delivered by the previous government. And we support the POA in that. And we know that every day the union does all it can to look after its members facing these challenges, and we stand with you in that. But we recognise too that the POA has a disadvantage when compared to almost all other unionised workplaces. As we know, this is why we're here this evening, its officer members cannot take industrial action due to the operations of Section 127. And when it's alleged that members have taken the action, some of my colleagues know only too well the kind of telephone call they will swiftly receive from the government legal department. We know those phone calls have developed into legal processes. We've heard from Mark about the direct personal impact on him and Steve with that. Sometimes we can see this off in their early stages, but it has ended in fines for the union and threats to senior officials with even worse. So what can we do as lawyers to assist the POA in this campaign? So at present, one of the actions we're taking is the case in the European Court of Human Rights, which Mark has spoken about. And in that case, we are seeking a determination from the court on whether the pay review body operates as an effective compensatory mechanism in the circumstances where the POA and its members, only in England and Wales, of course, have had their Article 11 rights infringed by being unable to take industrial actions. So to put it bluntly, does the pay review body make up for being unable to strike? And specifically, does it do so given the government's ability to set the review body's terms of reference? And of course, in December 2020, that included mandating that it could not consider recommendations inconsistent with the Chancellor's policy on public service pay. So clearly setting that agenda. And also, of course, the government's ability to reject the pay review body's recommendations in exceptional circumstances without adequate explanation, negotiation or challenge. So if we're successful in Strasbourg, the primary remedy is a declaration that the ban on industrial action violates Article 11 because the compensatory mechanisms are inadequate. Now, that would be a very difficult outcome for the government. We have heard, indeed, we welcome the commitments to human rights and the strengthening of workers' rights, which have come from our Labour government. At Thompsons, we've surprised absolutely nobody by welcoming very strongly the new Labour government. But now we're at the stage where the court has invited the POA and the new government to resolve matters amicably. We know from what Mark said, we know directly that we are still waiting to hear. So we really hope that the government takes the opportunity to reach a sensible and a workable outcome here. It cannot be right that as a nation, we ask you not only to work with some of the most dangerous and vulnerable people in our society, but that we require you to do so without the basic human right of being able to withdraw your labour when you cannot resolve disagreements with your employer. So we stand with you in the campaign and we will do all we can to reach the right outcome.
Thank you, Claire. And it's never, ever in doubt about the brilliant legal assistance that we get from Thompsons, whether it's on this particular campaign on the European Court of Human Rights, whether it's on personal injury claims, employment claims, and indeed injury to feelings claims over the MacLeod judgment, which I've got to say we were only one of a couple of trade unions that actually took that claim on and we were successful. So thank you, Thompsons, in everything that you do for the POA. Much appreciated. I'm going to call the next speaker now, who is another great trade union, campaigning trade union, Martin Kavanagh, the president of PCS. Thank you, Martin.
But tonight is a privilege to be asked to speak at this on behalf of PCS, another union that has members in the justice sector, members who work in the courts, members who know exactly what is going on right now in the justice sector and what the devastating swithing cuts have had over that period of time. And our members, believe it or not, like some others, like Joe Grady said before, you sometimes get unexpected links, don't you? Well, for many of you who won't realise that many of our members work coaches in job centres, also have to attend prisons. For those prisoners who are about to be released, to talk them through the benefit system, or lack of it, and what they're expected or what they can expect when they are released from prison. So we are absolutely 100% behind the calls and the demands of the POA for restoration of their rights to strike, a right taken away 30 years ago today. But I will also remind comrades that this is a battle that will always continue until those rights are restored. Because we are, in our union, PCS, we're also celebrating an anniversary this year. It's 40 years since the then Thatcher government banned the right to be a member of a trade union to our members who worked in GCHQ in Cheltenham. And many good comrades here today attended a march through Cheltenham in January to commemorate that occasion. But we were fortunate. The last Labour government did actually do what it promised to do when it was elected, and it restored those trade union rights to those members. It reinstated the sacked workers who lost their jobs as a result of having the temerity to demand that their right to be part of a trade union. Well, now this Labour government needs to do the right thing by POA, restore its natural justice, its human rights, and the dignity that every worker has and should have. Because we do not, despite what some people try and make out, we do not take strike action lightly. Quite frankly, many of our members can't afford to take strike action too lightly. What we do is we use strike action as a last resort. We use strike action when we have no other choice. And I know, and our union knows, that if it wasn't for the strike action that we and our members were able to take over the last 2 years, alongside other trade unions, last year we wouldn't, for the first time in 30 years, have had a doubling of the Treasury pay remit that was awarded to our members. And let's be frank, it wasn't the benevolence of Rachel Reeves that gave us the 5% Treasury remit this year. It was a commitment to try and buy industrial peace, based on our ability to strike previously. So, comrades, we fully support POA. We always have and we always will. Good comrades like Steve, and personal friendship to Steve and support he's given to me since I became national president. And I know that every single person in this room, but also many that can't be here today, can't wait to be back in this room or one like it in the not too distant future, celebrating, raising those glasses to the restoration of trade union rights for the POA and those members who so desperately deserve and need them. Solidarity, comrades. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
It also gives me great pleasure now in inviting Lord John Atlee to speak for a few minutes. John's been a big supporter of the POA in the House of Lords. John, you're more than welcome.
Thank you. Coming to speak where angels fear to tread. First of all, the good news. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, obviously he had a big part to play in our criminal justice system. So I think there are a few senior politicians who are more aware of the problems in the criminal justice system. And I'm full of hope and optimism that he will move to make things better. Better than that, he has appointed Lord Timpson. I'm not sure if he's still in the room. Yes, he is. He's waving at me. My mission in the House of Lords will be to look after Lord Timpson and make sure that he is able to get any sensible reforms through the House of Lords. And I hope to work very, very closely with him. We have made some progress recently. For instance, stopping Friday release. It must have been particularly depressing for prison officers to release a prisoner on a Friday, knowing that there's going to be lack of support when they get out. So that's good. I'm also pleased. I don't think I was the real ringleader in it. Actually, I think other people were working harder than me on this. But making progress on banning the sale of razors in the prison system. It struck me as madness. I couldn't believe my luck. I think I asked about 1 or 2 written parliamentary questions, and suddenly the government was changing its mind. So that's good news. There is bad news. I've made very little progress on the 68 is too late campaign. The problem I have there is that actually it's an issue for the Treasury determining the pension arrangements. But whenever I've raised it in the House of Lords, it's always a Justice Minister answering and taking the flak, but they can't change the policy. And Lord Thompson will be in exactly the same position. So it's very hard to make progress on that. I did draft a question that I thought would be answered by the Treasury Minister, but poor old Lord Bellamy was still there taking my flak as a Justice Minister. On the right to strike, for myself, what I would want to do is improve the terms and conditions of service of the prison service so that you'd have no desire to strike. I know that's not what you want to hear, but what I would like to see, I would like to see a waiting list of people wanting to join the prison service so that we're fully recruited. And the way we get there is by improving the terms and conditions of service. And if you haven't got a waiting list to join the prison service, then we're doing something wrong. The other bad news is that I'm a hereditary peer, and we've got legislation going through the House of Commons that means that I'm not going to be a member of the House of Lords much longer. I'll probably be retiring in the spring, and you'll have to find someone else to look after you in the House of Lords. But thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, John. I'm glad I got you in quick then before that. It gives me pleasure inviting Sally Jameson MP to speak. Sally is a former prison officer and branch official at HMP Moorland. So Sally, you're very welcome. I don't think you're old enough to remember when Section 127 was repealed, but I know you'll give us full support.
I want to welcome you all here today. I am incredibly proud to be, I believe, only the second prison officer elected to Parliament, and I think the first POA committee chair. So it's really fantastic. The thing that's so special about the POA union, and that's no disrespect to the unions that come is that every single NEC member, every single branch official and chair, they're all from the shop floor. Everyone knows what it means to work in these prisons and the other establishments that we represent. And I think that's why our membership is so high. I think that's why we're so driven. And I think that's why, for a small union, we're an incredibly successful unit, and long may that continue. I want to also put on record my thanks to the POA NEC and to Steve and Mark for the personal support that you've given me leading up to the general election. I was a candidate for 2 years, and then also since the election, because I honestly can say without the support of my colleagues at Moorland, POA members there and the POA NEC, my journey here would have been a lot more difficult. And I want to recognise you all for that, because it's important that the operational voice is in our Parliament, and you've helped me make that happen. So thank you very much. Prison officers continue to work in incredibly challenging jobs in increasingly difficult circumstances. And for too long in our political system, the operational voice of prison officers has not been heard. And I'm determined that through my election here, and also as my appointment as the PPS to the Justice Ministerial team, that will change. And I am even more certain of that now. It will not surprise you to hear that we have a Labour government with a ministerial team, and we've got some here tonight. We've got Nick Dakin, who's a Minister for Youth Justice, and also Lord Thompson, who's the new Minister for Prisons and Probation. And this is a serious team that are determined to bring change and improve outcomes in prisoners, which will ultimately benefit our members and prison officers and staff up and down the country. And you all here as POA members are absolutely integral to that, because you're the voice of the shop floor, and it's imperative that not just you people here, but everyone across the country is making sure that politicians like myself now, and also the Labour government, know how decisions that are made here are impacting our prisons across the country. And I have no doubt that Steve and Mark will be holding our feet to the fire in the coming years, and we thank you for that. So I just sort of want to say thank you for being here today. I look forward to working with you all in a very different role to what I have done in the past 6 years from this side of things. but still with the same aim of improving our prisons, improving working conditions for prison officers, and making sure that the Labour government delivers the change that we desperately need across the criminal justice system. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your support there. I'm sure I saw Andy Slaughter in the room, who's just been. Andy, good to see you. To see you. Andy has just become chair of the Justice Select Committee, but we've known Andy for a long time. Andy has been involved in POA campaigns before. Andy, you don't have to speak on that particular issue, although it's dear to our heart, but more over the Justice Select Committee and the importance of that Justice Select Committee, where we give vital evidence to the Justice Select Committee over the years. And you do listen to us from time to time. No, seriously, you do listen to us. So, Andy, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And I thought, even given the hugely brilliant speakers you've had so far, I feel they may be getting towards speaker fatigue. When you've had more speakers and you've had people who are not speaking, that's the way they decided to make it brief, I think. So, well, I'd say we haven't actually set up the Justice Select Committee. I'm really pleased to have been elected chair of it, having done 10 years, well, more than 10 years, 20 years here, but 10 years shadow on the Justice Committee, a member as a shadow minister, shadow Solicitor General, criticising the previous government and trying to hold their feet to the fire. And now we'll be able to do it all over again, but with a Labour government. So there you go. And I'm slightly grieving for the fact that for the first time in 20 years, I don't have the scrubs in my constituency. So, and the first time I haven't had represented a major and significant prison. But in the many, many times that when I went into the scrubs, I always made sure I said, and can you include the slot when I see the POA? I want to find out what is actually happening here as best I can. And I have had a very close working relationship over that time. I do admire absolutely what every single prison officer in this country does at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. And I trust you. I have great confidence in the ministerial team, as others have said, in Lord Thompson, Nick, and in the Lord Chancellor and in others. But it's not going to be an easy job because we are in such a terrible situation. And I think even Michael Howell would probably admit that prison isn't working at the moment for a lot of people because of the conditions of state that sits in it. We all have to work together to ensure that improves. But I know the people who bear the brunt of the pain and anguish of that are the people in this room, people you represent around the country in the scrubs, in every other prison. And that is always at the front of my mind. So whatever else we get distracted onto on the Select Committee, you can rest assured that we will be holding up the integrity of the POA, the rights of prison officers, and ensuring that they get a fair deal out of this government, which they didn't get out of the last.
The breadth and commitment of speakers at this event shows the level of support for the POA generally and the campaign for a restored right to take industrial action. It is a campaign that will certainly continue. You can keep up with the latest developments on this and all areas of POA activity at poauk.org.uk and, of course, from your local POA officials. Thank you for listening. We hope you have enjoyed what you have heard and will join us for the next episode of the POA podcast. Thank you and goodbye.